Hi all, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing another brand comparison, and today we are looking at the single pigment color of PR122, which is the Quinacridone Magenta. And then in addition, we will be testing for other colors, not single pigment, but along those same lines. So here are the paints that we are going to be looking at in no particular order. And then the brush that I will be using is a Princeton Select Lunar Blender in the 1/2 inch. This is the same one I used for my last one. And then I will also be using this palette knife for our texture test. And we'll make sure that I wash both in between each application. Of the tests that we will be doing today, we will be looking at color as is, so how it looks straight out of the tube on a single coat, detailed coverage, which is the ability to cover the fine details, total coverage, which is going to be the ability to cover a black circle, texture, which will be the ability to create and maintain texture after it's dried. We will look at tinting, so we will be taking a white and mixing that in with these colors, and then we will also be looking at a complementary color. Up first, we are looking at the Atelier, which is an interactive acrylic. This brand was actually suggested by one of the viewers, so I look forward to trying this out for the first time. It is our PR122. It is the cheapest of our single pigment colors, and so let's get started. This is a 2.7 ounce tube that retails at $8.42 per the Blick website. Second in our line of being tested is the Loft Professionals. This is also the first time I'll be using this one, also in a single pigment color of the PR122 as a transparent paint. This is a 2 ounce tube that is valued at $9.99 per the Michaels website. The third paint to be tested is the Liquitex Basics, also in the single pigment color of the PR122. This is also a transparent paint, and it is valued at $10.99 for an 8.45 ounce tube. So you are definitely getting more paint for your money. We'll see how it does on the actual paint comparison, and that price was based off of the Michaels website. Our fourth and final paint for the single pigment color tests is Golden. This is in the PR122. It is also a transparent paint, and this is valued at $12.38 for a 2 ounce tube, and that is per the Blick website. So certainly a bit more money than what the previous 3 brands were, and still in that 2 ounce tube. Here is an up-close look at our 4 paints so far. The Golden is certainly a lot darker than the previous 3, but all in all, I am pretty happy with how these paints have laid down. For the second portion of our testing, these paints are not single pigment, but they are in the magenta line, so wanted to test them as well, just so we have a little bit of a price range. So this is the Royal and Langnickel in the primary magenta 2. This is a 4 ounce tube and was valued at $2.97 per the Walmart website. And I don't actually have any details on what pigments are located within this paint, so we shall see how well it performs in comparison to the others. The next paint we are testing is the Winsor and Newton in the permanent magenta. The colors that are in this are PR122 and PV19, so the color variation is going to be a little bit different than the single pigment colors. This is also a transparent paint and is valued at $4.99 for a 2 ounce tube per the Michaels website. Our next paint is the Academy Acrylic in the Theo Violet. This is also a multi-pigment paint, so noted as being a PR83 as well as the PR112. This paint is in a 2.5 ounce tube valued at $7 per the Dick Blick website. The final paint we are testing today is the Blick Artists Acrylic in a Series 4. This is a very transparent paint, and the pigment in it is noted as being the PV19, so a single pigment but not based on our first four, which are the PR122. This paint is in a 2 ounce tube and is valued at $8.63 per the Dick Blick website. Alright, and here's a look at the paints so far, our 4 single pigment colors and our 4 additional. It looks like they are doing pretty well for that first coat coverage for round 1. The golden is definitely still the darkest of the paints shown, and then I would say that probably the lightest is actually the Blick Artists. It is very, very neon, very bright red. I would not classify it under the same category as these other paints. And then the Winsor and Newton is actually very purple in comparison to the other paints on this list. So I was a little surprised at the color once that was laid down, and I guess we'll see how it does later on. And now we begin round 2. So we will continue adding layers to both the detailed coverage and the total coverage for up to 6 coats. I'm hoping that we have really good coverage in advance of 6 coats, but this is a very transparent paint. It is not as opaque as some of the other paints that I have previously tested, and so the chances of us actually fully covering up before 6, I'm thinking are a little bit slim, but hey, we might get really lucky. Now on to our texture test. So I will be using that same palette knife for each of the different textures within this test, making sure to wipe off and clean that palette knife in between each transition so that there is no carryover of one brand to the next. Alright, and here we have the paints up close after the texture was created with each of the brands. I purposely tried to create little ridges in the hopes that the peaks would be kept even after the drying process, and then now we'll let it dry for a few days and see if they maintain those same peaks or if they flatten out, so stay tuned. Here we are at the end of round 2, and the paints are doing pretty well. The Atelier and the Liquitex Basics are performing about the same. They are kind of light in comparison to the other 2. And then for the other 4 paints we are testing, they perform pretty similarly, but the Blick Artists is significantly lighter than the other paints, and that golden is by far the darkest of the 8 paints being checked, so certainly a little bit more opaque than the other ones. And then in the total coverage test, they all are pretty close, but that golden does have a bit more red to it. Now here I'm showing you what I mean by just how neon that Blick Artist paint is. I mean, obviously it's not quite as bright as my nails, but it's pretty close. And now we're beginning round 3, which is taking the detailed coverage and the total coverage and doing another layer on each of those paints. All right, after round 5, it looks like golden has completely covered both the detailed coverage and the total coverage. The Atelier is close behind. And then for the not single pigment colors, I would say the Royal and Langnickel and the Academy are doing pretty well. We have now reached the 6th and final round, where we will put one last coat on the detailed coverage and the total coverage for 7 of the paints and see if we can make the detailed coverage and that black circle disappear. As we let those 6 coats dry, we will then be moving on to the tinting test, where we are going to be taking this Master's Touch Thick Body Acrylic in titanium white. I will be placing a glob next to each of our paints in equal portions and then mixing in a small amount of our brand per glob to see what the tinting ability is for each of these 8 brands. As the tinting section dries, we will be moving on to testing how it does with a complementary color. We will be testing the bright yellow-green from Master's Touch, which is also a thick body acrylic. This test is being done so we can see how well it can neutralize this bright green. We will be completing this in similar manner that the tinting test was done, equal globs next to each of the paints and then similar portions into the paint to see just how well it can neutralize that bright green. And here are both the tinting and the complementary colors tests up close so you can see how these colors really rendered out. All right, so the testing is done. Now to review back through what we have found. So looking mainly at our 4 paints that are the single pigment color, we have the golden, which turned out the darkest in the color as is. I would definitely say it's actually a little bit more red as well. And then followed very closely by the Atelier. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And then these 2 I would say are pretty close. This is my first time using this Loft Professionals, and I don't feel like it's worth the $10 if I'm being completely honest. And we'll get more into that in the rest of the tests that we do here. But these 2, first and second place, very nice color as is. Looking at our not single pigment colors, I would honestly say that these 2 would probably be my top picks for the color as is. This one is definitely a little bit more red, closer to the golden. And the Blick Artists, so it's this tube again. Yes, I know this is like a student grade paint. It is supposed to be like a series 4, but this is where I have an issue with purchasing colors just based off of what the name is, because this name is the exact same as the single pigment colors, but that is not the same color. That color is very bright. I mean, it's not quite as bright as my nails, but it's a bright color, and I don't feel like it's true to form for what this color is supposed to be. Anyway, I digress. Let's go ahead and move on to the detailed coverage. So the detailed coverage is where I had the swirly lines, and the only one that actually fully covered that up was the golden, and it did it in 5 coats. The rest of these all have 6 coats, and you can still see, let me pull this up so you can maybe get a better idea. I don't know if that's coming across on the camera or not, but the others all have 6 coats, and I really glopped on those last couple coats just to see if I could get it to just fully cover it up, and you can still see that design through. Now that goes back to what your goal is for using this paint. If you're just wanting to be able to do a wash or a color over top of a complementary color, or just to do slight color variation, all of these are staying pretty true to the paints. They are transparent, so thus they're not really doing a full coverage. If that's what you're looking for, then we're good to go. If you are looking for that more intense total coverage, or even for the detailed coverage, you might want to stick with something more along the golden lines. Now, looking at the total coverage, kind of same thing. So the golden is the only one that I would say fully covered. The Artist Loft for single pigment colors, and really just these two I would say covered probably the best for those single pigment colors. As you'll also notice, and I don't know if you can tell, these two dried in a gloss finish, and actually all the rest are a very, I wouldn't quite say matte, but more of like an eggshell or a satin. There's a very little amount of sheen to them, and these are just, in contrast, very shiny. Once again, going back to this Blick Artists, it is so red in comparison to these other paints, and I don't know, I have never used that paint before. That was an interesting test to do, but I'm gonna say I'm not super impressed. And then on to the texture test. So this one was the ability for the paints to create and maintain a texture. And I felt like they all did a really good job creating texture. However, these have now dried for a few days, and let me see if I can, I don't know if you can see just how flat some of those actually dried. The golden kept its nice little ridges. I mean, it flattened a little bit, but not nearly as much as the rest of them. The Liquitex Basics of the 4 single pigment colors maintained its texture probably the second best in comparison to the golden, and then I would say both of these tied. I was surprised to see just how much both of these had flattened out, but it goes on what you're wanting to do. I mean, if you're going to be using one of these 3 brands, it might be a good idea to add like a molding paste or some type of texture paste into your paint if what you're looking for is the ability for it to really create those ridges and maintain those once they've dried. And then our 4 other paints, they all pretty much flattened out completely to the page. So that was a little bit sad to see, but it just kind of goes back to, you have to figure out what your goal is for your painting. Are you wanting to have something that creates texture, whether that be with like a palette knife, or are you wanting something that if you're using like a firmer bristle brush like this, that it's going to maintain those brush marks or not? So kind of goes back to what you're looking to do and what you're looking to accomplish. Now, our next test was the tinting test. So it was where we took a same dollop of the thick body titanium white by Master's Touch, and I did equal globs along my palette of that white, and then added in equal amounts of each of the corresponding colors. And the golden stole the show here. It is a very pigmented paint, and so it had a very dark tinting to that white. And then these 3 were actually pretty close in comparison. I would say that this one was a skosh darker than the Artist Loft, and the Artist Loft was maybe just a skosh darker than the Liquitex Basics, but these 3 were pretty comparable. Nothing even came close to the golden. And then when we're looking at our other 3 paints, this, as I had mentioned up in our color as is test, was very purple in color, and actually when I tinted it with the white, that purple really comes across, and I don't know how well you can see it on the camera, but it is very purple in comparison to the other colors here. And then same with the Blick Artists. This turned out very, very pink. So very light, almost like a baby pink. So just going back to keeping in mind what your end goal is. And then our final test here was testing it against the Master's Touch Bright Yellow Green as a complementary color to see just how much that color would show through. And similar to what we did for the tinting, I took equal parts of this paint, put it on the palette, and then mixed in equal parts of the corresponding color. And the golden, once again, performed very well. This is by far the darkest of all of them. I'd say it took first place. And then we have our second and our third place tied. These two colors are almost identical. The only difference is that Artist Loft does have a little bit more of the gloss, where this is more of a satin color. And then over here, I was actually very surprised to see how dark the Blick Artists actually tinted the bright yellow green. That was a little surprising for me, and I was also very surprised to see how green these actually ended up staying. They didn't get quite to the level of orange as some of our other contenders. So all in all, I would say that golden by far performed the best, but it's also at the highest price point. You're having a tube of paint that is 2 ounces, and while it performs really great, it does cost quite a bit more. I mean, this is a Series 7, and it costs $12.38 per the Dick Blick website. There are other options. It really just depends on what your goal is, what your budget is, and then just keeping in mind that you can have multiple different brands within your painting palette and your painting toolkit for that matter. You just have to know and be cognizant that they don't all mix the same. They don't have the same tinting strength. They don't all have the same ability to create and maintain texture. So knowing your products, getting to know how they respond, you can have a variety of everything and just gradually work to having more paints that better fit your needs. So I hope this video was helpful. If there is another color of paint that you guys would like me to do, please let me know. I would be more than happy to test out some more paint. I have really enjoyed making these videos just because I mean, I didn't expect that the golden was going to perform that well for the tinting, and seeing how well it is able to neutralize a complementary color. So at the very least, I hope you all have a fabulous rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for more weekly art content, including more of these glorious paint brand comparisons. All right, thanks so much.